your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we're pleased to have Mr. Jefferson Morley as our guest. He's an author and the editor of JFK Facts, the premier destination on the web for information and discussion about the assassination of JFK. Mr. Morley has worked in Washington journalism since 1980 as an editor and reporter for the Washington Post, Salon, The Nation, and The New Republic. He teaches a course in the history of the CIA at the University of California in the District of Columbia. His forthcoming Kindle ebook, CIA and JFK, The Last Assassination Secrets, is the culmination of 20 years of research into the role of certain CIA undercover officers in the events that led to the president's death. The book reveals the existence of a top secret batch of JFK assassination files that the CIA is required to release in October of 2017. Mr. Morley, welcome to our program.
Great to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to plead general ignorance on the subject. I've read about it. In fact, I think we had mentioned that we had Jacob Hornberger from the Future of Freedom Foundation. He gave me more background than I had known than I've ever known before regarding the assassination. But the JFK assassination has to be all the way up there with the 9/11 conspiracy. You know, they always call it a conspiracy, and it just rubs me the wrong way. If you're contrary to what is being published by our federal friends in Washington, it's not a point of view, it's a conspiracy. So you're way up there. So you're fighting probably one of the biggest battles, probably even bigger than 9/11, probably the number one battle. And so I give you all the credit in the world. I don't think I would do it because I can see this brick wall, coming at me real quick.
Joe, there's definitely a brick wall there. But the point is, we are getting past that tired conspiracy debate, because what we have now is not theories. What we have now is the facts. After 5 investigations, after a lot of declassifications of records, we understand the events that happened in November 22nd, 1963, much better. This was the 9/11 of its day. It was a national catastrophe. Right. And it was never well explained. The president was killed under mysterious circumstances, really. And the government put in a story very quickly that one man had killed the president for no reason. And people didn't believe that. They didn't believe it in Dallas, which is a very conservative city. They didn't believe it in New York, which is a very liberal city. It just didn't hang together. But the government put forward this story that one man killed the president for no reason. And we've been stuck with that ever since. Right. And if you look at what my book does, CIA and JFK, is, look at the event, look at what we've learned over the year, and what do we understand now? And one thing that's very clear, Joe, is the original story that some guy came out of nowhere and shot President Kennedy kind of for no reason. He was a communist, but not really, what was the motive for the crime? And then the man who was accused, who denied he had committed the crime, Lee Oswald, is then killed in police circumstances. Mysterious, shocking, stunning events. I wasn't around then. I was in kindergarten. So I have a vague memory of the day that this happened, but a formative event. Well, flash forward 50 years later, we understand much better now. That guy who supposedly shot the president, Lee Oswald, right? He was not an unknown guy who came out of nowhere. Okay, he was very well known to senior CIA officials, and I can name a dozen examples. Okay, and I don't have a theory about those officials, but Oswald was well known to senior CIA officials before November 22nd. That's a fundamental fact, indisputable, that was never put on the table in 1963-64 when they were coming up with this official story. Because if that were known, some people at the CIA would have lost their jobs, Well, that never happened. Nobody ever lost their job because of the Kennedy assassination. Nobody ever went to jail. Nothing. So that's why it remains in American political culture to this day. It never goes away. We always have a new movie about JFK or about
Right.
LBJ or about the assassination, because this event, this signal, super important event in American history, has never been explained. And the government's explanation is simply not credible. I mean, it doesn't explain the facts that we know. So
Right.
at the time, it was soothing. It was like, oh, it's just the tragedy of life, some guy killed the president. Okay, that's fine. But we're grown-ups now. That is not an adequate explanation of how President Kennedy came to be killed. So my book is about, well, what do we know now and what might we know soon? And so this is not something that is off, this is something that the next president is going to have to decide about. So let me give you a little background, Joe, because this is an important part. Kind of, my book tells the story, and this is not well known. It doesn't get covered in major news organizations yet. I think some of them are beginning to realize that it's a very good and interesting and important story. But the story is this. Back in 1992, Oliver Stone made his movie, JFK. And this was kind of the original depicting Kennedy's assassination as a conspiracy of his enemies in the Pentagon and the CIA. Very popular movie, very well done, a lot of great actors. And so this critical acclaim for this movie really provoked tremendous debate in Washington. And so Congress, in the wake of that, with Stone, pointing his finger and saying, cover up, conspiracy, Congress said, well, the government needs to make all of its JFK records public. And so they created a law, and it was a pretty good law. And they created an independent group, and they went through all the government records. And there was tons of stuff that was secret. This is in 1992, so this is already 30 years after the crime. And so in the 90s, in the mid-1990s, a huge amount of information came out into the public record. And that's how I can tell you this story about how well-known Oswald was to the CIA. These new records that came out, they confirm that, okay? That was not something that was really shared with any of the earlier investigations, but now it's pretty clear that there was a lot we didn't know about the CIA and Oswald. So that law went into effect, a lot came out, people like me and JFKFacts.org and MaryFarrell.org, which is another website about the assassination, JFK Lancer. A lot of scholars publishing books have picked up on this new material and really begun to, it gives us a much better understanding of what the Kennedy assassination was all about. And, we're not really wrapped up in that conspiracy debate, I'm not interested in theories.
Right.
I'm a journalist. And
Right.
in my experience, the people who want to talk about JFK theories are usually the people who don't want to talk about the facts. Okay, so my approach is, let's leave out the theories. You can think whatever you want. And you can say, Jeff, you're full of it or whatever. I'm not going to try and talk you into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about the evidence. And my book, CIA and JFK, is about what the government files, the CIA files that are known to exist, that are known to be related about the assassination, and that are scheduled, and this is the kicker, Joe, that are scheduled to be released in October 2017. Why October 2017? Well, when Congress passed that law in 1992, they said all JFK records must be made public. But if the agency has a concern about a name of an informant or an operation, they can request that be delayed from being disclosed right away. But after 25 years, everything has to be made public. Okay, that law was passed in 1992. Add 25 years, and you come to October 2017.
Right.
So we have this deadline coming up where a lot of this material is supposed to become public. Now, according to the law, there is a loophole in the law. And the loophole in the law is the agencies, like the FBI or the CIA, if they want this material to stay classified, stay secret, after the 25 years is up, they can do that, but they have to get the approval of the president. So next October 2017, we'll have a new president. We don't know who that will be, but that president is going to face a choice. Do we make the last JFK records public or not? And I think it's safe to say that the CIA and the FBI are going to request that at least some of this material remains secret. So we're going to have a fight, and the next president is going to face a real question in October 2017. What do we do? Well, this is the same thing as maybe you've talked about it on your show, the 28 pages from the 9/11 Commission report, which have been, there's 28 pages that are secret that have never been made public about 9/11. And people have been pushing for those to be made public. Senator Bob Graham, President Obama is thinking about it, he says. So that's like an issue today. Well, the JFK files that are going to come up in October 2017, it's the same thing. It's like, here's a little piece of our history. Are we going to make it public? Or are we just going to say the agencies have the right to keep this history walled off from us? So this, JFK, it's 50 years ago, who cares about that? But it's actually an issue today. It still matters today. It's still important. And, people still care about clarifying this really crucial moment in American history. So my book, CIA and JFK, Kindle ebook, you can order it now, explores what we really know about these records and who was involved. And my approach is pretty narrow. I don't come in with a theory. I come in and look at who were the CIA people who knew about Oswald, who were involved in these events in 1963, and what do we know about them? And so there's, like I said at the top, there's probably a dozen CIA officers who were in some way knowledgeable about Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination. So, what were they doing? What did they think? Were they manipulating him? Did they underestimate him? Whatever, any reasonable person who's interested in the subject would say, yeah, we should straighten this out. Well, reasonable people don't extend to the CIA, where they just, it's their job to keep secrets, and they are gonna hang on to these secrets and not talk about it. So it's an important issue it's an important measure of does the public, the citizenry, have the ability to kind of pressure their government into being accountable. And this law is very clear. It was passed in 1992. You got 25 years. After 25 years, everything is public. Right. And that's the point that we're at now. So the question is, will we get everything? And it's a test of our government, and it's a test of ourselves. Same way that the 28 pages are. Can we get this? Can we know the full story of 9/11, or is the government going to hide it from us?
Right. Well, let me ask.
Sure.
Why are you publishing the book now? Or making it available now? Why not wait till after October 2017? What's the logic there?
Because the logic is this, Joe. If there is not public attention put on these records now,
okay,
the CIA will get away with withholding the maximal amount, and we will never learn anything.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we need attention between now and then. We need the presidential candidates to address the issue. What do you think about the 28 pages? Do you favor the release of the rest of the JFK records? Those are basic questions that should be on the table now for the 2016 election, because if I waited till October 2017, it's too late. The only thing that will stay the hand of the CIA from keeping this material public is people talking about it and coverage. Because then they'll be embarrassed, and then they might be embarrassed into doing the right thing.
Right.
So that's why it's coming out now.
Okay.
And that's why people need to know the story now. We will have leverage in October 2017 if enough people know about this. Presidential candidates have talked about it, addressed the issue, said, here's what I think about, how the government should approach secrecy issues. And that's really the bigger issue here. It's not what happened 50 years ago. It's how much of our, of the government's business can be kept secret. That's a legitimate issue for 2016 election. So I want to get that out there. That's why I'm publishing the book now. Right. I want to get that out there now so that we have a shot at getting these records.
I see. Now, what kind of relationship did Lee Harvey Oswald have with the CIA? When you mentioned that relationship, or that known factor?
So what I said was that there were a dozen CIA officers who knew about him. They were familiar with his file. They were familiar with his travels. They were familiar with his biography. Where did he come from? And he had a very interesting life for a young man. He had been in the Marines and served in Japan and the Philippines. He'd got a discharge. He went to the Soviet Union out of sympathy for communism. He lived in the Soviet Union for a couple of years. Well, this whole time when Oswald was doing all of this, the CIA was paying close attention to him. And the officers who I talk about in my book are the officers who knew about him. They were informed about him, and this isn't guesswork or rumor or theory. This is based on the CIA and FBI records that have been released. So that's what. Oswald, the accused assassin, was somebody who people at the top of the CIA were thinking about at the time. I mean, within a few weeks before Kennedy was killed, and this was all unknown. So it never came out until now. So that's the story that I'm getting at, is what did these guys know? When did they know it? Who did they think Oswald was? What was going on in their lives? What was going on in CIA covert operations? So we're really into the heart. The story goes really into the heart of how an intelligence agency works. And I'm not saying these guys killed Kennedy. I'm saying if there's anybody in the U.S. government who knew about this, it was these guys. So if we want to understand November 22nd, 1963, we need the records of these CIA officers. We need to understand what were they doing at that time in terms of political action, psychological warfare, secret operations against Castro. That is the milieu in which Oswald lived when he was accused of the assassination. So we have this veil has been drawn over CIA operations in 1963. And now, only 50 years later, is the veil beginning to come down, and we can see what was going on. So that's what this is about, is we are, kind of reopening what the CIA was doing in 1963 and trying to understand, did that have some connection to the events that led to the assassination of the president?
Yeah. Was Harvey Oswald, was he under sort of surveillance? They knew about him. Was he under surveillance during this period of time? The CIA should have known what he was doing, or where he was, or what he was planning.
Joe, it's not that they should have known. They did know.
Oh, okay.
There's no doubt about that. Wherever he went, the CIA received reports on his activities, and they received reports from many sources, from the FBI, from the New Orleans Police Department, from the State Department, from a secret operation to open mail. They had opened the letters of Oswald's mother. So he had a very fat file in the CIA before November 22nd, 1963. And this is another thing that is really, not talked about in major news organizations and mainstream media, but is also, pretty much indisputably true, is the CIA really knew a lot about this guy. So they, now, was somebody in touch with Oswald? We don't know. But they were certainly in a position to know everything about him. His politics, his travels, his foreign contacts, his state of mind, his letters from his mother. I mean, that's how detailed their knowledge was of this man.
So was he chosen as the perpetrator of this crime simply because he was an easy target for the FBI, because they can justify it by virtue of his background?
Well, yeah, as somebody said in the White House right after the assassination, this whole story, the president killed by a communist, it was like, it was too pat. It was like, it didn't make any sense. And the more you look into that and understand who Oswald was, I mean, there's really no motive for the crime. Oswald was a liberal, socialist, leftist guy. He wasn't a crazed fanatic or anything like that. He thought Kennedy was kind of an ordinary politician. The thing that Oswald liked the best about Kennedy was that he was pro-civil rights. Right. And very, very unusually for a young man with no education from the South, Oswald was instinctively sympathetic with black people. And, this is the height of the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, all of that. And so Oswald was sympathetic. The idea that he would then turn around and kill the most pro-civil rights president, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, so you ask, was Oswald a patsy? Well, Oswald said he was a patsy. When they asked him, when he was arrested, there was a press conference and reporters were shouting at him. And somebody said, "Did you shoot the president?" And he said, I did not shoot the president. I'm a patsy. And so, a patsy, that's a fall guy. That's somebody who's set up to take the blame for something that he didn't do. So, Oswald said he was a patsy, and you have all of these people around him who specialize in secret operations. It's a possibility that he was set up and manipulated.
Yeah. There's only one thing that I'm somewhat familiar with. I understand that the rifle that was used by, apparently used by, or allegedly used by Lee Harvey Oswald was a Carcano rifle. Am I correct?
Right.
Now,
Yes.
I'm sort of a gun guy, but I mean, many years ago, I did a lot of reloading and stuff like that. And I still subscribe to, Gun Test magazine, and I read the articles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything in years, but I own a Carcano rifle. So what I did is that I looked up in my, I got several manuals on, certain rifles and the characteristics. And the one characteristic of a Carcano rifle is its inaccuracy. And the reason for that is that it's an overbore rifle. It was made overboard. The logic was, well, it'll be a little less accurate, but it won't wear as much, so we can, men in the field could fire more rounds with it, without having to have it refurbished.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so I thought to myself, I read this, and this was only a few years ago that I read this, because I have a Carcano rifle. It's a garbage rifle, and I got it for $100, by the way. And I said to myself, if someone was going to assassinate the president, you'd think they would go out and get a relatively inexpensive, highly inaccurate rifle to shoot at a far distance. That didn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And your story is great, Joe. I mean, I'm no gun expert. I've read in the forensic evidence. There's a lot of people who know a lot more. But yeah, a cheap, a cheap, lousy rifle, and expert marksmen were, for the most part, unable to get off the number of shots, to fit the official theory. So, that's another aspect of it. It's, if you look at another way to look at the whole story is, would Oswald be convicted under, based on the evidence that we have now? If you brought this case to, and it's a very weak case.
Right.
It's a very
very weak case. Right.
It's a forensic case, and there's a lot of, there's bad evidence. There's evidence that's been mishandled or fixed. So it's part of the problem with this case is that there's an effort to kind of draw a veil of confusion over all of it. And the point you bring up, that it doesn't make sense that this would be the murder weapon for this crime.
Yeah.
So
now, you can make an argument that he didn't know any better. He was a wacko. He didn't know a rifle from a handgun or a knife, and But here's a guy who's a marksman. Apparently, well, he was in the military. And these guys know everything about the one thing that they need to operate properly, and that's their sidearm, their firearm, their rifle. I mean, they know everything about it. They're one with the cosmos with it. And you don't take the most inaccurate rifle ever built to assassinate. When I read that, I said, I've never heard this before. And I'm reading, and this is just a technical magazine. This book that I was reading was a technical magazine. Reloading, and talked about different gunpowders that are used for the. Had nothing to do with the assassination with Lee Harvey Oswald. Nothing at all. It was just it was a reloading magazine. And when I read that, I said, my God, I've never heard that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you've touched on just one of the many evidentiary problems in this case, and so we don't have a good explanation of Kennedy's assassination, but we do have an opportunity to really learn something more. And there are big breakthroughs possible in this, and I think that we could have a drastically different understanding of Kennedy's assassination in 5 years than we do now. If we had all the information, or maybe not. I'm not making any promises, but there is a lot of very relevant information that the CIA and other government agencies are still hiding. And October 2017 is a real chance for us to get that material. So my book is an effort to kind of explain this whole story and what's out there and what might be the explanation. What was really going on with the president and his enemies at that time, and Oswald, and it gets, it's a complicated story. It's prone to oversimplification, but it's not incomprehensible either. It's not beyond the pale. We're talking about the workings of an intelligence agency, and contrary to what you see in the movies, intelligence agencies are a bureaucracy. They follow procedures, even when they're very secretive. And so we understand now a lot better how the CIA operated in 1963. It's not a matter of mystification. It's a matter of fact. And with that, we can begin to, really understand this great event, important event in American history in a new way.
Yeah. Was it that it just seems that there are so many players in this play, and didn't it require many people to cooperate in the same way, and to assure that there was no whistleblowers, or naysayers, or contrarians in this entire production, if you will? It seemed that they had to be incredibly well coordinated, and everyone that was told to shut up and say nothing, they had a guarantee they had to shut up. And then the question is that Lee Harvey Oswald, he was shot, right, by I forgot the guy's name.
Jack Ruby. Yeah,
right. Did that play into that whole scenario that I'm just painting right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the time, this trauma, the President of the United States shot down in broad daylight. We were a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The president was killed by a communist. I mean, Lyndon Johnson, who became president that day, was terrified that he was going to find himself in a nuclear war. And so the convenient truth that one guy killed the president for no reason, that was very reassuring to everybody in power in Washington. And so President Johnson decided, before the investigation decided, they started with what the conclusion was going to be. That was, this guy did it alone. And we're not going to talk about anybody else's motives. We're not going to talk about his association. We're not going to go there because it might be war. And so this kind of panicky feeling, which was very real at the time, put this blanket over the story. Now, there were people right from the start who said, no, that's not what happened. What about this? And there was a concerted effort right from the start to, discourage discussion. It was painful. It was, don't go there. It's anti-American. But the fact is, it was very strong. It was very popular right from the start. That the official explanation didn't make any sense. People gave the government the benefit of the doubt. The Warren Commission, many distinguished people, Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, probably the leading liberal in the country, and Richard Russell, Dean of the Senate, leading conservative in the country. So, people gave them the benefit of the doubt, but it just didn't hang together. Now, a lot of people who rushed to defend the official story, they didn't know that something else had happened. They were probably acting sincerely. They couldn't believe that anything else was possible. So, were a lot of people in on it? Well, a lot of people were just going to rally to their country. They're going to take what's most reassuring. They're going to go with what the CIA says, if you work at the CIA especially. So the idea that the official story wasn't right was kind of incomprehensible to people, especially as you get closer into the government. If you work in the government, you think the government's a good thing or a pretty good thing. If you work at the CIA, you probably like the CIA. And so, there was this tremendous pressure to conform and to reject, and anybody who objected or said anything differently was, attacked. And Mark Lane, the author and lawyer who died last week, was the most prominent example of this. He was kind of a obnoxious guy from New York and put himself forward as Oswald's attorney. And he wrote this book about the Warren Commission report and about the assassination called Rush to Judgment. And I mean, this book was an amazing bestseller, like 7 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list at #1.
Yeah.
And so this is about 1965. This is maybe 2-3 years after the assassination. It was like, there were very widespread doubts from the start. And another thing that's quite interesting to note and has become very obvious over the years, they say, conspiracy theorists, they don't really know how the government really works. And that's often true. People who aren't well schooled in the government with conspiracy theories, that's not true. But what's interesting about JFK is there were lots of people very high in the government who didn't believe the official story. And let's start right there. Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson endorsed the Warren Commission, said, laid this to rest, all of that. Privately, Lyndon Johnson never believed it. Never. Lyndon Johnson juggled conspiracy theories. But he never believed that one man killed the president for no reason.
Yep.
He thought President Kennedy had been killed by his enemies.
Yep.
He didn't know who. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, he suspected either mafia or CIA. Jackie Kennedy suspected that there was a conspiracy.
Right.
I wrote a book about Win Scott, the CIA's top man in Mexico in the 1960s. Super conservative, super loyal to the CIA. Didn't believe the official story and wrote it down.
Yes.
So these kind of doubts were very pervasive at the popular level. People said it doesn't pass the smell test.
Right.
And even at the elite levels of government, people said, they went along publicly because they had to, if they had to do it, it had a certain momentum. But privately, people didn't really believe that. So that's another reason why, there's this dissatisfaction. Even our great, even our leaders of our government don't believe this story. So what really
Jefferson, excuse me, I hate to interrupt you, but we've had a caller on the line that wants to break in and ask a question. So do you mind if I interrupt you and we take the call, please?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Let's talk.
Line 1, caller, you're on the air. Your question or comment, please.
Hello, Joe. This is Lloyd.
Lloyd, thank you for calling Liberty Talk Radio.
Yeah, on the mystery of the Mannlicher Carcano rifle being used by Oswald.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense from the average person's standpoint. But when you put in the fact that Oswald was passing out the leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba, working under Guy Bannister, passing those out, and he was marketing himself as a Cuba sympathizer, which I think he was probably a double agent kind of working for the CIA at that time. Now, in 1958-59, I believe it was, when Castro was trying to overthrow Batista, the CIA was delivering Mannlicher Carcano rifles to Castro to overthrow Batista. So now you have Oswald, who purchases by mail order Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago, the Mannlicher Carcano rifle. He paid more than what it should have cost. He got the scope with it. It was like $29.95. Back in those days, I remember I was a gun enthusiast as a kid, looking through Montgomery Ward catalog. You could buy a British 303 rifle, the war surplus, for $8.99.
Wow.
And you could buy several. You could buy several of the old Belgian rifles and stuff like that for $13 or something to that effect. Now, if you're trying to set up a patsy, what better rifle than to have one that someone is passing out leaflets in support of Cuba, and have the same rifle that the Cubans would use? Any comments?
Yeah, a good point. The Carcano rifle was widely available. It's peculiar that you could get such a cheap rifle anywhere. Why would Oswald get it as a mail order item? But I think that it seems unlikely that the rifle did, cause the wounds of all the people in the car. Such a cheap rifle, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so, well, I believe that the rifle could have done the damage. And in fact, back a long time ago, back in '72, I was overseas. I was in the Air Force, and I was in a good library, and I actually started going through the Warren Report. I didn't go through it all, of course. It's several big volumes, but I found the parts in there where they were going through the trajectory, and the ballistics and all this kind of stuff. And there is a plausible explanation for the bullet that went through Kennedy's neck and through the seat and into Conley, and if a bullet can actually do that, because Conley was sitting down lower than Kennedy, which would give it, and plus, once a bullet hits something, it does deflect somewhat.
Right.
And then the other thing is, people say it was a pristine bullet. I've seen pictures of the bullet. It was not totally pristine. It was some somewhat shaped a lot like a bullet simply because it was a jacketed bullet. It was not, lead nose like people use for hunting. And those bullets, unless they hit something really, really hard, do come out pretty much, looking still like the shape of a bullet. But I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist, but I've read a lot of this stuff, but I was just going to bring up basically the note on the rifle, why that particular rifle would be one that if the CIA were setting up a patsy, that is the perfect rifle to do it.
Okay. All right, Lloyd. Great comment. Yes, Jefferson.
Yeah. So, I don't, in my book, I don't really address these kind of, forensic issues. They're always in the background. I'll just say, in reference to his comment, Governor Connolly was quite clear that the first bullet hit President Kennedy in the back, and the second bullet hit him in the back, and it was two different bullets. And Connolly said that, and his wife Nellie, who was sitting next to him, said that, and they were both experienced hunters. They knew their way around guns. But if what they say is true, then the Warren Commission is false, because the Warren Commission said that that's not what happened. So even right there, at the most basic level, the government's account is not supported by the two witnesses who were closest to the, at the scene of the crime.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Lloyd, are you still on the air?
So
no, Lloyd's gone. Okay. Jefferson, could we just break for about 60 seconds for station identification and give an opportunity for our sponsors to say hello? Okay. Sure. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Don't go away. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go away. We have the second half is going to be better than the first half, if you can believe that.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com.
Ranch Acres Audiology is about caring, about getting the most out of life, about personal attention.
Sometimes helping someone with their hearing is really helping them with more than just hearing. That's the goal of my practice. That's what my goal has been for 20 years.
You're invited to attend our next free Lunch and Learn seminar. Call us today, 918-749-7711.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. With us, we have Mr. Jefferson Morley. He's the author and the editor of JFK Facts, a premier destination on the web for information and discussion about the assassination of JFK. We're discussing his book, the upcoming book. It will be a Kindle ebook, CIA and JFK, The Last Assassination Secrets. The only book that I ever read on JFK was a book by Roger Stone, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. What's your opinion of that book?
It's a political tract designed to malign the reputation of a liberal hero. And that's what Roger Stone does. He's a hardball, right-wing, conservative political strategist, and he always, when his political campaigns or whatever he's involved in, that's what he talks about. Is he goes bare knuckles. Now, is it true? No, it's not true. It's not factually supported. Lyndon Johnson, the case that Lyndon Johnson killed President Kennedy is very weak. I think Stone brings that up as part of his larger project of, advancing a hard right conservative agenda. Roger Stone, as you may know, has been very close to Donald Trump in launching his campaign. Reportedly, there's been some differences between the men. I was hoping that Roger Stone's a nice man. I've met him. He knows the assassination story very well. I think his partisan enthusiasms get the better of him. But he could be a good voice for full disclosure on the JFK issue if he has some influence with Donald Trump. So, yeah, you know, on the internet, the LBJ did it meme is very popular. It's popular in Texas. And, you know, for sure, LBJ was a real son of a bitch. You know, I mean, the more we know about him, you know,
right. It's amazing.
He was mean. I mean, and every time you think you heard the most, you know, then you hear another story. Yeah. It's like even wilder than that. So, you know, but no, I think it's very interesting that President Johnson did not believe the official story. You know, no, whatever you think about Johnson, whether you like him, hate him, whatever, you know, he was a superb political mind. Yeah, you know, right. He was a genius. He had an incredible political mind, a nose for power. You know, look at what he did in his life, where he came from and all that. You can't say he doesn't know what he's talking about. So when LBJ says the government's version of the story is incredible, you know, I give that a lot of credibility.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Then the question remains, if the official story is in question, who killed JFK?
I mean, I think that I don't think we can point to individuals, but I think we can say what's never been investigated is the possibility that the president was killed by enemies in his own government, and people with the ability to cover their tracks through the use of official secrecy. So we're talking about people working in, you know, classified agencies, which would be, you know, Defense Department and CIA. So if there was a conspiracy, that's where you need to look. And if you want to look at the people who were most likely to be involved, you know, that's what my book is about, is, you know, we can get down and talk about specific people. So I think that if we got all the records we're talking about, we might know a lot more about the culpability of certain CIA officials in the death of the president.
Right. What would be the motive? What was the motive, in your opinion, at this point in time?
You know, Kennedy was taking, he had taken a series of decisions that were very disturbing to the Defense Department, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs, and the CIA. And these were, there were three really that were, the first was the refusal to support the CIA brigade at the Bay of Pigs, which was attempting to overthrow the Castro government. A lot of people in Miami and the CIA never forgave Kennedy for that. They felt that he had abandoned them in the line of fire, that was disgraceful. Then during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a year later, in October of 1962, Kennedy's advisors and the Joint Chiefs strongly recommended that he invade the island, destroy the Soviet missiles that were being built there, and throw out Castro. And Kennedy refused to do that, even though the Joint Chiefs were unanimous, and even most of his civilian advisors favored that. And Kennedy rejected that hawkish advice and pursued a more dovish policy and settled the crisis without a war. And then the third thing was in 1963, Kennedy pushed very hard for a test ban treaty on the testing of nuclear weapons. And this was opposed by the Joint Chiefs, at least privately. And so, you know, Kennedy was moving the country's foreign policy to the left, and he was going to reopen diplomatic relations with Cuba, and he was perceived as a threat to U.S. national security by a lot of people. So that would give the motive for an assassination operation, which would be to defend the national security of the United States. That's how such people might have seen it. So I think that's the leading possibility that's never really been examined, and that's where, you know, the evidence that's still secret, you know, that's what we'll learn about if we get those records. So
yeah, you know, if this occurred today, there would be a lot more skepticism than there was back then. I mean, back then we could not perceive that anything, you know, internally would have been some sort of been involved in that thought process at all.
Right. Yes. Yes. No. And you know, we know a lot more about how the government works. In 1963, the CIA was just a rumor.
Right.
And even the best informed, journalists in Washington really had no idea how the CIA actually worked. And that's very different now. We do have much more, skepticism. And likewise, the same thing, we have more knowledge, so since Ed Snowden came along, we understand much better how this mass surveillance system, NSA and all that works. Before we could have guessed, you might have thought this or that, but the government lied about it constantly. The congressman would say, "Sir, do you spy on, millions of Americans?" "No, we do not." That was a lie. Right now we know much better, and so the government has less credibility as people become more informed, and they can't get away with those kind of lies anymore. So, that's that's the current relevance of JFK, which is, if we're going to stop the government from lying today, well, the one place to start is what happened 50 years ago, because that's way in the past and doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's history, right? But if we can't do it on JFK, we don't have a prayer of holding the government accountable today. So there is a contemporary importance to the JFK story. It's a reflection of, do we have the ability to hold the government accountable back then or today?
I'm going to ask you a very unfair question, if you don't mind. And that is that there were other events that the government story doesn't seem to hold water. I mean, it sounds good, but it doesn't run very well. And of course, I always pick on 9/11. The only thing I know, for example, about 9/11 as a fact, I own a company that does occupational health testing, and we are the quintessential experts in respirator use. We do training on it. We have special machines that cost thousands of dollars to make sure that it fits properly. I mean, if you had a question in the state of Oklahoma regarding respirators, you came to me. I mean, that's we are the people, all right? And we do thousands of fit tests on every conceivable respirator in the world made. Yet on 9/11, the government indicated that they had just received 3,000 respirators that they were giving out to all the people who were helping with the rescue effort. And I never forget this. I sat by the TV when I heard that, and I literally yelled out. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I yelled out as if I was speaking to someone in the room and saying, "No, you didn't." And then I looked, I said, "Who am I talking to? There's no one in this room but me," And I always felt stupid. I said, "I'm talking to the television set." And the reason why that came out so quickly was because I knew the respirators are just-in-time inventory, and you can't get 3,000 respirators. You may be able to get 20, but you can't get 3,000. Now, you can get 3,000, but you're going to have to wait. And, of course, they didn't give out 3,000 respirators. They gave 3,000 dust masks out. And the dust masks are only used for very specific types of contaminants, and they have to be fitted properly so that they work, et cetera. So I won't go through the whole history. And I'm yelling and saying, well, this is all wrong. In fact, the government broke every single regulatory rule regarding respiratory protection that they write about. They broke every single one of them. And I was so angry. I said, how could they do that when they impose these restrictions on companies, and justifiably so? The companies should be doing this, But then they break every one and say, look how great the government is. They gave 3,000 respirators out free of charge to all these people, and that was all bunk. And after that, I became incredibly skeptical of everything the government said about 9/11. Everything. I started questioning everything. Now, I don't know much about it. I'm just like the average guy on the street. Who knows what happened? But I guess my point being is that we seem to have that same skepticism today regarding the JFK assassination as we do now of 9/11. Of course, if everything I'm saying, that means I'm a conspiracy nut and all this other stuff, and spare me with that,
No, I mean, it started with JFK because the government didn't produce a credible explanation and never did. And so people's skepticism and cynicism about the government went up. And if you chart over time, do you have faith and confidence in the federal government?
Yeah.
World War II, 50s, 60s, it's rising. 1964, Warren Commission is issued, and it goes like this.
Right.
And it goes straight down, and has never really recovered. Now, there were other things that worked there, but, Vietnam and all of that. But that was when people learned that, it was in the government's interest to put out a certain kind of story, because that satisfied all the interests, but didn't satisfy the interests of truth. It satisfied all the political interests. So we have that same skepticism. Now, 9/11, Joe, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. 9/11 was a conspiracy. I think it was a conspiracy created by Osama bin Laden and this guy named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed came up with the plan and hired the guys, and bin Laden gave the money, and they conspired, and the result was the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
So I think that part of the story is true. Now, where government secrecy comes in, the 28 pages is, who else was involved in this? Was there more Saudi money going to these guys? What did the U.S. know about that? So, there's aspects of the story that we don't know and that the government would prefer to hide.
Right.
Do those change the fundamental picture of who was the intellectual author of the crime? I think we know who the intellectual author of the crime was on 9/11. It was Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah. Yeah, but it garners enough skepticism that it's difficult to accept anything that is being said today, and it doesn't give you. In other words, it sort of skews the compass. It's like putting a magnet next to a compass, and you never know what direction you're going into. And
Yes,
just the other day, the president said on television, he said he. I don't remember the exact words, but he said his administration respects the sovereignty of foreign countries. And you think about all the drones that are being flown all over the place, dropping bombs, in sovereign countries, and sometimes it's hospitals and innocent men,
Right.
women, and children. I mean, how the audacity to say something like that? I mean, you don't have to be a news hound and verify it. You know this is happening, and what they say is an exact contradiction of what they're doing that you see every day on television. And I think the United States is losing its credibility, not only with its in the world, but with its own citizens. And this is why the likes of a Donald Trump, for example, and a Bernie Sanders and those guys, and maybe a third-party candidate is getting so much traction during this electoral season.
Yeah. I mean, when the government, makes these, implausible statements. It's playing with fire because it's very reckless, and it undermines everything that the government does. It undermines the notion that we can act collectively, which we have to do, so the propagandistic aspects of this, and it's in this national security realm where the lies, the fake statements are especially profound because it's always dressed up with, we're protecting you, so you can't know this because it's for your own good that we can't tell you this. It's a very pernicious argument, and it makes people very cynical because they feel that they're being played, and they are, and the country was kind of played after the Warren Commission. We didn't have a real investigation of why the president was killed. We had an investigation of convenience. And the explanation we got was what served the array of political interests in Washington. And that, that's still the way the game is played now. So the challenge is, how do we, the average people out there, hold the government accountable? And, we do have these powerful new media tools, the internet. So the people have some more power. We have whistleblowers from the inside, like Ed Snowden. We have WikiLeaks. So, it's a struggle. It's a constant struggle.
Yeah. Now, can you divulge to us at this point in time, or would you prefer to withhold it? What is the conclusion of your book?
The conclusion of my book is, if we want to know the truth about who killed President Kennedy, we have to have all the evidence. And so we don't have all the evidence. So, if we want to know the truth, and we want to know, specifically about the dozen or so men and women who I talk about in my book, then let's see the evidence. But until then, we're not going to have that whole stupid conspiracy debate, right? We're going to say the facts, which is the government is concealing, the CIA is concealing its records about the JFK assassination to this day. Now, why are they doing that? I mean, I'm skeptical to suspicious. If you don't have something to hide, don't hide anything.
Right.
The CIA has nothing to hide on JFK. They will produce these records. If they come forward and say, we want to hide something, then I will say, I think they got something to hide because they're telling us that, right? Telling us. So conclusion of my book is we're going to come to this moment in 2017 and we're going to have that conversation, right? And there's going to be attention to this issue. Believe me, Joe, there's going to be attention to this issue because people understand now what's out.
Yeah, if in fact these papers, when they are presented in October of 2017, reveal that much of what the government, or some of what the government has said about the assassination of JFK is proven to be incorrect or false. Right. You think this was going to have an effect on mostly everything that the government has said about other incidences that occurred? You think there'll be some sort of backlash against government in general, and would it be broad enough in scope to maybe lessen or weaken the government as we know it today?
Yes, no, absolutely, it will. And this is the symbolic importance of JFK. Is it still resonates? It's still, it's kind of an archetypal American story. Even, I teach this stuff in school, so I meet a lot of college students, and they're still fascinated by it,
right.
Although it's very far from them. And people like me, who actually can remember the day, barely, I was in kindergarten. I mean, we're going fast, so the number of people actually can remember the event is shrinking every year, but there's still this very basic interest. And so clarity about the Kennedy assassination would have I believe, a powerful ripple effect of saying, hey, we got to get this right. We have to hold secret agencies accountable. It will create this pressure for more disclosure, more accountability. That's all to the good. So I think that that's why October 2017 is important, because it's not just about now. It's about the 28 pages.
Right.
It's about mass surveillance. It's about what are we going to do about this today. It's a kind of exhibit A from the past that is very relevant to the present. And so, yes, I believe it will have political ripple effects if we learn more and can clarify the JFK story.
And I think those ripple effects will be very unsettling, but overall they'll be good long-term for the salvation of this country, whatever is left of it, and hopefully will help steer us in the right path, because right now we just seem to be going in the wrong direction. So I hope your book is an impetus towards correcting, that journey that we're on, which I don't particularly care for.
Right.
Now we have about 2 minutes to go. I'd like to give you the last 2 minutes to sum things up, inform our listeners how they may reach you or order your book and when it's available, etc. So the rest of the show is yours.
Yeah. So Joe, thanks for the opportunity. I love to be able to have like a real discussion instead of like a soundbite discussion, where we can talk and we get a caller who knows something and he can say his piece. So thank you for taking the time. My book, CIA and JFK, The Last Assassination Secrets, is a Kindle ebook. You can get it on Amazon, download. You can pre-order it now. It'll be available on June 10th. And it really is a roadmap to what we know about the CIA and the JFK assassination and what we might learn in the near future, and highlights the importance of the secrecy issue in the 2016 campaign. So I urge people to look for the book on Amazon, or want to know more about me, and look at JFK Facts, which is jfkfacts.org. It's a website about the assassination. We present a lot of news, a lot of information, answer your questions. And you can email me, editor at JFK Facts, and I'm always answering questions from readers. People are curious about this. So I think the more people who know about this, the more we will have attention on this very timely issue of secrecy and national security in 2016. And the JFK story is just a brilliant, fascinating way to understand, kind of how we got into the predicament today. Yeah. So my my book is a guide to that.
Right. Well, maybe this will be the spark to set us in the right direction. I want to thank you so much for being on our show. You've been a delightful and informative guest, and I do hope you will accept our invitation, maybe to return at a later date when there's some updates. And if you do,
Yes.
just give us a call when you think it's appropriate. We'd love to have you back on the show.
Joe, I would love to do that. There will be more news, so we will talk again, and I look forward to that.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on our show. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends. Let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.